My wife cheated on me with my younger brother, but when I discovered they were planning to steal $35,000 from me with a fraudulent scheme, I hired a lawyer, froze their accounts, and destroyed them legally. Now he's fired, she has nothing, and they both lost all the money. A revenge they never saw coming. I'm 28 years old. I work in corporate finance, and the story I'm about to tell probably sounds like something out of a cheap soap opera, but I swear every word is true. About a year and a half ago, I discovered that my wife and my younger brother were having an affair, and not just that, but they were also trying to steal money from me through a fraudulent investment scheme. And, well, let's just say I didn't sit around doing nothing. But before getting to that part, I need to give context, because none of this makes sense without understanding what my life was like before everything went to hell. I met Victoria when we were like 23 years old, at one of those boring networking parties that companies organize so new employees can socialize. She worked in marketing. I had just started as a junior financial analyst, and honestly, I thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. She had that smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. You know? We started dating, and everything was amazing for the first 2 years. We got married when I was 26. She was 25. And I thought I had found my person, my life partner and all that stuff. My parents adored her, especially my mom, Carol, who basically adopted her as the daughter she never had. The wedding was perfect. Honeymoon in Italy. We came back to our apartment in the city and started our life together. Everything seemed to work. Lucas, my younger brother, was always the golden child of the family. 1 year younger than Victoria, so 27 at that time. He worked in sales for a tech company and had that natural charisma that makes people adore him for no apparent reason. I was the responsible older brother, the one who got good grades and followed the rules, but Lucas was the fun one, the spontaneous one, the one who always had a funny anecdote to tell at family gatherings. It never bothered me much, honestly, because I had my own life and my own achievements. But looking back, I should have noticed there was something weird about how he always needed to be the center of attention. After Victoria and I got married, Lucas started visiting us more often, like he'd come over for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. And I thought he just wanted to spend time with his older brother and sister-in-law. How naive I was. Things started getting weird about 2 years ago, when I noticed that Victoria and Lucas were spending more and more time together. At first it was small things, like text messages at all hours, or Victoria casually mentioning that she had lunch with Lucas because he was near her office. I worked long hours, sometimes I'd get home past 9 at night, and Victoria would always say that Lucas had stopped by to say hi or that they had gone to the gym together. At that moment I didn't give it much importance because, he was my brother, right? You're supposed to be able to trust your brother. But there was something about the way she smiled when she talked about him, or how she laughed at his jokes in a way she didn't do with me anymore. I started to feel this knot in my stomach every time I saw them together, but I told myself I was being paranoid and jealous for no reason. Things got weirder when Victoria started being more distant with me. She didn't want to have sex as frequently anymore. She was always tired or had a headache, and when I tried to talk to her about our day or plan something together, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. I tried everything. Honestly, I planned romantic dates, bought her flowers, tried to reconnect us, but it was like talking to a wall. And Lucas, that son of a bitch, kept showing up at our house like nothing, sometimes even when I wasn't there, because Victoria had given him a copy of the keys for emergencies. Emergencies. I can hear how stupid that sounds now. About a year and a half ago, I decided I needed to know what was going on because the feeling that something was wrong, I wouldn't let me sleep. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency and needed a few days off. Then I told Victoria I had to travel to Chicago for work for 3 days for an important audit. She didn't even seem surprised or upset. She just said, "Okay, have a good trip." And that confirmed to me that something was definitely wrong. The day I was supposedly leaving for the trip, I left the house with my suitcase at 7 in the morning, drove to my friend Samuel's office, my best friend since college, he worked in it, and asked him to help me install a tracking app on Victoria's phone. Samuel looked at me like I was crazy and asked if I was sure I wanted to do that, and I told him yes, that I needed to know the truth. It took us like 2 hours to set everything up because Victoria had recently changed her iCloud password, which was already suspicious in itself, but eventually we managed it. That same day, I drove back to my building but stayed in the car parked outside, waiting. Around 11 in the morning, I saw Victoria leave the building dressed to go out, not in the workout clothes she normally wore when she stayed home. I followed her, keeping my distance, and she basically drove straight to Lucas's apartment on the other side of the city. She parked, went into the building, and didn't come out until like 3 hours later. 3 hours. I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. I kept following her, and they both went to a coffee shop downtown, one of those hipster places with hanging plants and specialty coffee that Victoria loved. They sat at a table in the back, and I could see them through the window, laughing and touching hands across the table in a way that was definitely not appropriate for a brother-in-law and his sister-in-law. I took out my phone and took like 30 photos. Photos of them holding hands, of Lucas stroking Victoria's hair, of them kissing when they thought no one was looking. Each photo felt like a knife in the chest, but I kept taking them because I knew I was going to need evidence. After the coffee shop, they went back to Lucas's apartment, and Victoria didn't come out until past 7 at night. I sat there in my car the whole time, feeling how my marriage and my relationship with my brother were disintegrating before my eyes. When she finally came out and drove back to our house, I waited like another hour before going back, pretending I had just arrived from Chicago. But here comes the part that still makes my blood boil. About 2 weeks after discovering the affair, I decided to check our bank accounts because I had noticed that Victoria had been withdrawing strange amounts of money. We had a joint account for household expenses and separate accounts for our personal savings, or at least that's what I thought. It turns out Victoria had opened a hidden account like 6 months ago and had been transferring money from our joint account to this secret account. And we're talking about like $35,000 in total. $35,000. I hired a private investigator, a guy that Theodore, the family lawyer, and my dad's friend, recommended. And what he discovered was even worse than I imagined. The hidden account was linked to a fraudulent investment scheme managed by a guy named Julian West, a professional scammer who basically promised guaranteed returns of 20% in 6 months through supposed investments in cryptocurrencies and real estate. Lucas had gotten Victoria into this scheme, and they had both been transferring money, not just mine but also money that Lucas had gotten from my parents under the pretext of a fake medical emergency. My parents had given him like $15,000, thinking he needed surgery that his insurance didn't cover. It was all a lie. Everything. And the part that hurt me the most was realizing that probably Lucas and Victoria had planned all of this together. The affair and the theft. As if I were just an ATM with legs. I didn't confront Victoria immediately because I needed a plan. I called Theodore and explained the whole situation to him, showed him the photos, the bank records, everything. He told me I had a solid case, both for divorce and for potential criminal charges against Julian West and potentially against Victoria and Lucas for participating in a fraudulent scheme. We spent like 2 weeks building the case, gathering every possible piece of evidence, every text message I could recover from Victoria's phone through the tracking app, every bank transaction, every photo. Theodore also helped me document everything legally so I could freeze the accounts at the right time. Finally, one night when Victoria came home after supposedly being at a work dinner, I was waiting for her in the living room with all the photos printed out spread across the coffee table. When she opened the door and saw me sitting there in the darkness with only the reading lamp on, I knew she knew everything was over. She froze in the doorway and said, "William, what is this?" with that shaky voice she uses when she knows she's in trouble. I just told her, "Come here and look." She approached slowly, saw the photos, and all the blood disappeared from her face. She tried to stammer an excuse, something about how it wasn't what it looked like, but I cut her off and said, "Victoria, I have photos of you kissing. I have records of you visiting his apartment 3 or 4 times a week for months. I have text messages. I have everything. Are you really going to try to deny it?" She broke down right there, started crying and saying she was so sorry, that she didn't know how it had happened, that Lucas and she had connected in a way they didn't expect. I just sat there watching her, feeling completely empty. The woman I had married, with whom I had planned to have children and grow old together, had betrayed me in the worst possible way with my own brother. Then I showed her the bank records and asked her about the hidden, account. Her crying stopped immediately, and her expression changed to something like pure panic. She tried to say it was for a surprise, a trip she was planning for our anniversary, but I had already talked to the investigator and knew exactly where that money had gone. I told her I knew about Julian West and the fraudulent investment scheme, and that both she and Lucas were going to pay for this. The next day, I went to Lucas's apartment. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up and knocked on the door until he opened it with a sleepy face in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. When he saw me standing there with my phone in my hand showing him the photos, his expression went from confusion to terror in seconds. He tried to close the door in my face, but I put my foot to block it and told him, "We need to talk, Lucas. Now." We went into his apartment, and I basically laid everything on him. Told him I knew about the affair, about the money, about Julian West, about everything. He tried to play the brother card, saying, "William, I'm sorry. We didn't want it to happen like this," but I was too angry to listen to his excuses. I told him I was going to ruin his life the same way he had ruined mine, and that he better prepare himself because what was coming wasn't going to be pretty. My mom, Carol, called me like 2 days later, crying on the phone, saying that Lucas had told her everything and that I needed to forgive him because he was my brother and family is forever, and all that shit. I explained to her about the stolen money, about the fraudulent scheme, everything, but she kept defending him, saying that probably Julian West had deceived them and that Lucas hadn't had bad intentions. I couldn't believe it. I told her mom, "Your younger son fucked my wife and stole $35,000 from me, and you're asking me to forgive him?" She started crying harder and saying I was being cruel and vindictive, and I simply hung up. I didn't have energy to deal with her eternal favoritism toward Lucas. I officially hired Theodore as my lawyer, and the first thing we did was freeze all the joint accounts and the hidden account where Victoria had been transferring the money. The bank required documentation, but Theodore had prepared everything perfectly, showing evidence of fraudulent activity and unauthorized transfers. Victoria went crazy when she realized she couldn't access the money. She called me screaming about how I dared to leave her without funds, and I told her very calmly that she should have thought about that before stealing from me. I filed divorce papers like a week later, and the case was basically airtight. I had photographic evidence of adultery, bank records of the theft, text messages, everything legally documented. Theodore told me it probably wouldn't even go to trial because Victoria had no way to defend herself. But I didn't stop there. Lucas worked for a fairly large tech company, and it turns out the HR director was a guy I had played golf with a couple of times through business connections. I sent him a very professional email explaining that I had discovered Lucas had been involved in questionable financial activities and that I thought the company should know given that he handled client accounts. I didn't lie about anything, I just presented the facts. The company did its own internal investigation, and like 2 weeks later, Lucas was fired. He called my office, screaming that I had ruined his career, and I told him that was nothing compared to what he had done to me. Lucas's reputation in our social circles went down the drain pretty quickly. I didn't have to do much. Honestly, I just told the truth to some key people, and the information spread on its own. Turns out when people find out you fucked your brother's wife and participated in a scheme to steal money from him, they tend not to want to associate with you. Who knew? Victoria tried to contact me several times during this period, leaving crying voicemails and sending texts saying we needed to talk, that we could fix this, but I ignored her completely. There was nothing left to fix. Theodore handled all the legal communication, and I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce was finalized like 4 months after I filed the papers. Victoria signed without fighting because she knew she had no case, and because Theodore had made it very clear that if she tried to complicate things, we were going to go after her legally for the theft and potentially for participating in fraud. She was left with basically nothing. Just her car and her personal belongings. The house, which I had bought before getting married and was only in my name, stayed with me. All the savings accounts, with me. The only money she got was what was in her personal account, which wasn't much because she had spent most of it on Julian West's scheme. The bank eventually flagged all the transfers to the account linked with Julian West as fraudulent, and both Lucas and Victoria had to pay considerable fines for participating in the scheme. Julian West was arrested like 6 months later for large-scale fraud. Turns out he had scammed like 200 people for a total of several $1 million. Lucas and Victoria lost all the money they had put in, obviously, and had to deal with the legal consequences of having participated, although they didn't face criminal charges because technically they were also victims of the scheme, just voluntary and stupid victims. Lucas eventually moved to another city because he couldn't handle the shame of living here where everyone knew what he had done. My mom still occasionally tries to get me to talk to him, but I've made it very clear that Lucas is dead to me. He's not my brother. He's just a guy who shares my DNA and who made the worst possible decisions. Victoria also moved somewhere. I don't know where, and I don't care. The last time I heard from her was when she signed the final divorce papers. I'm okay now, honestly. Better than okay. I'd say it took me time to process everything. I'm not going to lie. I spent several months feeling like shit and questioning everything about my life. But eventually, I got to a point where I realized I had dodged a huge bullet. Better to discover who your wife and your brother really are before having children with her or investing more years in those relationships. Samuel helped me a lot during that time. He basically forced me to leave the house and do normal things when all I wanted was to stay in bed staring at the ceiling. Theodore was also incredible. Not just as a lawyer, but as a friend, always available to talk when I needed it. About 6 months ago, I started dating someone new. A woman I met through work. It's nothing serious yet, we're taking it slow, but it's refreshing to be with someone who is honest and direct about what she wants. I don't know if I'll eventually get married again. That remains to be seen, but at least now I know exactly what warning signs to look for, and what non-negotiable boundaries I have. I sold the house where I lived with Victoria because it was full of memories I no longer wanted, and I bought a penthouse downtown that is completely mine. No history, no ghosts from the past. My relationship with my parents is tense, especially with my mom who still thinks I was too hard on Lucas. My dad understands the situation better. He told me a couple of months ago that if he were in my place, he probably would have done the same or worse. Carol and I talk occasionally, but it's superficial. About the weather or vacation plans, nothing deep. She knows that her favoritism toward Lucas contributed to him growing up, thinking he could do whatever he wanted without consequences, but she's never going to admit it out loud. Last week I ran into Victoria at a Starbucks, completely by accident. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair, and when our eyes met there was this awkward moment where neither of us knew whether to say something or just ignore each other. I opted for the latter, grabbed my coffee and left without looking back. I didn't feel anything, not anger or sadness or nostalgia, just a kind of empty indifference. I guess that means I finally truly moved on. I'm not going to say I'm grateful for what happened because that would be a lie, but I also don't regret how I handled the situation. I did what I had to do to protect myself and make sure the people who betrayed me faced real consequences. And honestly, I sleep pretty well at night.